Hi there, my name is Memo, this is my channel, Houseplantygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see some of it behind me and in front of me. I talk about tropical houseplants. So today I'm going to continue on with the plant review series with a review that's been requested quite a bit, but I've been a bit hesitant. It is about the plant that's in front of me right here, and I will be giving you some close-ups throughout the video, but it is for the Philodendron pastazanum, and we'll get into why I've been a bit hesitant throughout the video. Now, for the people that have been here before, welcome back. As always, you know that you can find the chapters at the bottom of the video, so if you want to skip to your favorite part, you can. And some ground rules for the new people joining for the first time. Essentially, this is a plant review series where I talk about my experiences, so it won't be unbiased. It will be biased to what I've experienced with my plant in my conditions, and my conditions in this situation is within my conservatory in the UK, and whatever that might mean in terms of humidity, heat, cold, all of the above. And I always encourage people to, if you've got this specific plant, and today specifically, I really am encouraging you, if you've got this specific plant and you want to share your own review, just drop it down below in the comments, and hopefully this will become a repository of more reviews like this, because as far as I'm aware, there's nothing like this online where you can go and see people's actual experiences years later in terms of owning a specific plant. So without further ado, let's move into the first topic. So the background on this plant, and hopefully this will start making sense as to why I've been a bit hesitant to review this plant. Firstly, I've not had it for that long. Anybody who's seen my review on my Anthurium regale, and if you haven't, I'll link it up the top there. But if you've seen that, you know that I got this plant at the same time that I got my Anthurium regale, or regale. I'm still not entirely sure how you would pronounce that necessarily. And I got this from an eBay seller, and the story behind why I got the pastazanum specifically, and here you can see one of the oldest leaves, and here you can see the newest leaf, and we'll come back to things in just a moment. But I got this because I was actually looking for the Philodendron Dean McDowell. And anybody who's seen the other video will know that I still haven't got the Philodendron Dean McDowell. It's still part of my wish list, and hopefully one day soon I will be adding that to the collection. Interestingly, a bit of a side note, when I went to pick up this specific plant, the same seller who had the most beautiful collection also had a very, very large Philodendron Dean McDowell, and that really kind of solidified me wanting a Dean McDowell because just wow. And I know that they are quite similar with the pastazanum in terms of look to a certain point. So I thought, let's try the pastazanum until I can afford, or until I can find a big enough specimen of a Dean McDowell. Now the background with this, and I'll kind of expand a bit more throughout the video in all the different sections. And this is why I encourage you to leave your own review, because my experience with this plant has been a challenging one. And I lift it up so you might be able to see. When I say new leaf and old leaf, I mean only two leaves, basically. And you can see here, that's where the growing stem is of the specific plant. It is a crawler. I will be getting close-ups as well that I will intersperse throughout the video. But I'm not going to lie, this plant has, for me, been one of the most challenging plants in my collection for several reasons. But again, I'll dive into that a bit more in the rest of the sections. But overall, it wasn't a plant that was particularly difficult to find back then. I'll talk a bit more about that in availability as well. And the price wasn't too bad either. And yeah, I think that's all I want to go into in the background section. I think we're going to get into the more nitty-gritty in the other bits of the video. So moving into speed of growth. Okay, so with this plant, the speed of growth, I would say, is kind of average. And by average, I mean, I'll use the same benchmark that I always do, which is if I'm relating this to a golden pothos, in the same conditions within my care. If a golden pothos in the summer might bring out 2 or 3 leaves, this one might bring out a new leaf in a month, basically. Both of these periods are within 1 month period. So it's not the slowest growing philodendron that I have. It's not the fastest growing philodendron that I have. It's kind of average. And I will also caveat this to say that it might also be because I've struggled a lot to keep foliage on this plant for several reasons. So this could be potentially a bit faster. I would have expected this because it's a crawler, because it also doesn't have the velvety leaves that the gloriosum, and there is no way of not relating this plant to potentially something like a gloriosum, because they can be quite similar in the way that they grow. They're both scramblers. They've both got heart-shaped leaves. They both can get quite large. So I'm always going to try to compare them to each other. And it's interesting because the gloriosum, with the fact that it's got the velvety leaves, and most people know that it's not a particularly challenging plant, it's surprising because this has got more kind of waxy leaves or more kind of shiny, leathery leaves. And generally those types of plants, in relation to the velvety plants, tend to be more stable, more hardy, faster as well. So it's interesting because that hasn't been my experience with this. But as I said, I keep losing leaves on this plant at an alarming rate. Granted, I've probably could be giving it slightly better light. It does now have a grow light that is quite powerful near it, and I can see the leaves are kind of leaning towards it. You can also see some bleaching that's happening on the leaves. That is, and some burning as well. That is because of the heat wave. Even though this wasn't getting an awful lot of light, its position meant that it was in quite heavy, intense light throughout large parts of the day when the heat wave was happening. So unfortunately, it did get some damage. Did I care? Probably not. And that might be a bit of a spoiler as to what's going to be coming in a bit, basically. But let's move on to ease of propagation. And I personally have not propagated this plant. Interestingly, I think I've made the decision now that after this video, I will be chopping the most recent leaf, and it's got a growth point on it as well. And I will be propagating it at that stage to see if I have any more luck, because actually the growing stem is quite thick and chunky on top of the growing media, which on this one it is pon. So I thought I'd give it a bit of a try. Based on what I'm seeing online and based on kind of availability in terms of prices, I don't think this is any more challenging to propagate than a gloriosum would be. Obviously, if you've had experiences chopping and propping this specific philodendron, do drop your comments down below. I think a lot of people, including myself, would probably be quite interested, but I would assume that it's a relatively straightforward process. How I would propagate my gloriosum is probably how I'm going to propagate this. Is one of two ways. Either you just take a direct cutting, and as long as it's got some aerial roots on there, I would probably put it in a baggie with maybe some damp perlite or sphagnum moss or even some like damp pon, and close the baggie up so it's got like decent level of humidity within that. Make sure that it's getting some light and leave it there, and it will do its thing and it will root out. The other way that I've done it with my gloriosum, for instance, is I've done it through air layering, because I was a bit dubious of, oh, how do I do this when I cut this? And you would just wrap damp sphagnum moss around some of the aerial roots, make sure that it's covered with something like a cling film or something like that, and just check in to see that that sphagnum moss isn't going fully bone dry. And then you should start seeing some roots, and eventually when you're comfortable with the level of roots that you've got within that damp sphagnum moss bowl, essentially, you can then cut it and put it straight into your growing media. It's already got some roots, and it's less shocking, I find, to the mother plant. I would normally do that if I was a bit worried about losing the blood. I'm less worried with this one, so I think I'm probably just going to chop it and put it into a propagation bag and hope for the best. Looking at availability with this plant, and I did touch a bit throughout the beginning of this, I did find it on eBay. It wasn't particularly expensive. It was mid to high double digits, and I think at that point it was maybe going for a bit more. if I'm not mistaken, and I'll see if I can put a picture here of what it looked like when I first bought it from my plant care app. Hopefully it's a decent picture, I'm not entirely sure. But it had maybe a couple of leaves on it at the moment. Interestingly, same with the Anthurium regale. The reason why the seller was selling this out of her collection is because both of these plants struggled. So the big caveat that I will give for this video in terms of my experiences of this plant is I don't know if I got a dud. So I don't know if all pastazanums will exhibit the same issues that I've had, or whether or not it just happened that the seller didn't have a particularly good cutting, or it would have struggled regardless of what I did. I don't know, basically. Interestingly enough, the regale, which apparently there was issues there, I've not been able to keep it unhappy, if that makes sense. That's a really weird way of saying it. I've managed to keep it relatively happy, and it's growing at a level that I think most people would be happy with. So that one is fine. So I think with that one, it might have just been our different types of care. Maybe my care worked a bit better for the regale. My type of care really doesn't seem to be working well for the pastazanum in this case. But pricing wise, I don't think it's dropped too much. I think it's still kind of high to mid double digits now. They are a bit more available. I'm seeing them come on the market a bit more. I think you can get slightly cheaper ones if you get them as an unrooted cutting potentially. But yeah, I think they're not as difficult to find as they were back then. And even back then, they weren't that challenging to find. Nowhere near as difficult as Philodendron Dean McDowell. But yeah, so I think it's an interesting one with this plant because I can't help but judge it negatively based on my experiences with this plant. And I don't know if that's fair. That's why I'm kind of encouraging you from the beginning of this video. If you've had good experiences with this plant and it's a solid grower, and I've had a couple of comments here and there on some of my videos with people that have had good success with this. So I don't think it is a problematic plant. I think it's just either my care for it or I got a bit of a dud, basically. So I don't know, maybe, and this is something I've always said on other videos as well, just because you can get it doesn't mean the plant is going to be the best one for you for whatever reason that might be. But it's nice to experiment, basically, and I have tried my best with this plant. But yes, in terms of availability, do I think there's going to be more of it coming on the market? Maybe. I don't think it's particularly slow grower, so in that respect, there shouldn't be an issue. If other people struggle at the same level that I am with this plant, maybe that's why we're not seeing more of it, but I don't know. I don't want to judge it because I don't know 100% if there's been a lot of people that have had bad experiences like me, or if there's a lot of people that have had really good experiences with this. So I'll leave it up to you all to kind of make some comments down below. Moving on to pests for this specific plant, and this is where I start twitching in the corner. Out of all of my philodendrons, and again, the same caveat that I've said in all the other sections, this just might be my conditions or my experience, all of the above. Every single pest that you can get on a plant, or that I have got in the past, I have had on this plant, a lot of the times at the same time. And it's been treated the same way that I would treat most of my other plants. Has this had thrips at some point? Yes. Have they grown ridiculously fast on this? No. So I was able to control that quite quickly. Has this had spider mites? Yes. Did that grow particularly quickly? Kind of, but I did manage to get it under control. And mealybugs on this one. So people that have been here for a while, they know that I've been struggling with mealybugs generally in this conservatory. But out of a lot of my plants, if there is one plant that I would say that nearly all mealybugs will gravitate towards in mass, it would be this one. And on top of that as well, this plant is also a great one for whitefly. So I've had a lot of whitefly on this plant, more so than any other, more so than any other plant. Now, I will say something about that. And this is something that applies to all plants, not just this one. So hopefully this might be something that some people might know. If not, hopefully this is a chance to learn something new. With plants, when you get pests on the plant, so a lot of the times what can happen with pests is if the conditions for the plant aren't entirely okay and the plant isn't entirely happy, and this might be even with your best kind of attempts because you might just not be getting something exactly right in the conditions that it requires to grow. It will, if I'm not mistaken, based on what I've seen in my own research, it releases pheromones, and it releases pheromones that are kind of distressed pheromones. So it's kind of like, help, 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 I'm not happy. Now, the interesting thing with a lot of the pests, not all the time and not all pests, is that they are sensitive to those pheromones, which means they see a plant that is struggling, they get the pheromones, and they're more likely to then attack that plant. The problem that then happens is you get a bit of a catch-22 situation because that plant was struggling before it was releasing stress hormones or pheromones even out, and it's now got pests, so it's struggling even more. So it will release more pheromones, and there's potentially a chance that you will get even more pests being attracted to that stronger or more potent pheromone because it's in more distress. So a lot of the times what you might get on some plants, especially plants that you might have missed a pest infestation, is this might have happened. So you might have had one type of pest and it's gone in volume, and all of a sudden you see more pests trying to attack that plant. It's because of those distress signals. I don't know how accurate that comment is, but that's based on some of my own research. Correct me if you think I'm wrong with this, or if there's any scientists on there that know that I'm talking rubbish, but I think that's accurate. So I think the reason why maybe I've had so many pests with this plant is because it's struggled with pests pretty much from day one. I don't think I did double and triple and quadruple check when I bought this plant into my collection. It did not have any pests at all, basically. It wasn't in the best growing media, and you could tell that the seller that I bought it from, and she was a lovely lady and her plants were very, very happy, but you can tell that she'd lost love for this plant and it was kind of a bit neglected. The growing media wasn't as good as it was. I did get some free pon and a free pot off the back of that, and I have not used the pond because it was so gunky. I don't think the pond maybe was rinsed out as much, or maybe there was other things in the pond. And the actual container or the growing pot, basically, I haven't used yet, not because I don't want to use it, it's just I haven't had a chance to utilize it just yet. It was a round, shallow lechuza pot as well, actually, so I haven't found something perfect to put in there just yet. But yeah, with pests with this one, pretty much, in my experience, everything under the sun. So moving on to accessories or care. And again, this is probably not going to be, I'm probably not going to be the best person to tell you about care with this plant because I have not been able to keep this happy. And I would be quite happy to admit that I have not kept this plant happy. Whether, as I said, again, whether or not it's me or whether or not this plant is a particularly difficult plant, I don't know. So that's for you all to decide and probably berate me a bit in the comments. Please be nice. But yeah, with this plant, how I've been growing it, and I'll lift it up again so you might be able to see. I have got it in a long container. This is a lechuza container as well. I've got it in lechuza pond. I have it in a water reservoir. It does grow quite low to the ground in my space because I didn't have a lot of space for it prior. I still don't have a lot of space to it prior. The fact that it's giving me as much of an issue as it has, and because it is as much of a pest magnet, there is zero chance that I'm moving it anywhere else closer to any other plants that don't give me as much grief and that I enjoy a bit more. So there's a lot of things stacked against this poor pastazanum. But yeah, so in the lechuza pond, or kind of any semi-hydro, you can do the DIY versions if you've got your own DIY versions. And it's probably getting medium to bright indirect light. And that might be the mistake that I was making there. Maybe it's the light level that was an issue throughout most of the year. Ignore what I was talking about before in terms of the heat wave and the really, really bright days. That wouldn't be normal for this plant. And yes, it's getting a bit better light now in terms of the fact that it's growing close to a relatively strong grow light. But that's what it's had. It's been in my conservatory, so the humidity level in here is really, really good. It does get blown about a bit by some fans because I've got some low fans, so that might also be a thing that might be causing an issue. Don't know. But essentially with this plant, I've been able to, for a long period of time, I was able to keep about 3 to 4 leaves on it. At the moment, there was a point where it was a part of the single leaf club, and it looked like, and it still is, really struggling with pests. I keep treating this on a regular basis and it's still not really going anywhere. As I said, I don't know whether or not when I'm going to chop and prop this, whether or not I'm just going to remove it out of the growing media and see if I can grow it in something else and if it will be a bit happier there. This might be one of those plants that will just do better in soil. So, and to be fair, my Gloriosum is in my aroid soil mix. It's not in semi-hydro, and that's doing quite well. So I might just, yeah, I think that might be happening straight after this video. Note to self. But yeah, this is not a plant that you probably want to see my care advice from this. Did I have a support stick on this if you saw and you were eagle-eyed when I brought it up again? Yes. Did it need it? Not really. It was just kind of, I was trying to get it to grow in a certain direction. So that might be another thing. It's also growing and it's hanging off the pot now rather than growing on the growing media. So that might also be causing a bit of an issue. So there's a lot of things that could be going wrong with this specific plant. So but wrapping it up with final thoughts. And I don't think a lot of people are going to be surprised by what I'm going to be saying in this section based on what you heard about my experiences in the previous sections. So I'll start with the usual one that I asked first is, knowing what I know now, would I purchase this plant again? Absolutely, categorically not. And I'm really, really hoping, but again, from what I've seen from other people, the Dean McDowell isn't this problematic. And again, I'm going to sound like a broken record in this video because I truthfully don't necessarily think that this plant is problematic. I think my care or the plant that I got had problems with it to begin with, rather than the plant itself being a challenging plant. So, but yes, absolutely under no conditions would I get this plant again. Do I think I wasted my money for this specific pastazanum? Yes. And then coming on to the score, and this is the one that I've been alluding for a while. So if 0, 1 would be the worst score, 10 being the best score, how would I score this? A 1, really. It's been such an underwhelming and disappointing plant for me that I don't think I can give it the score. When I first got this, I thought this was going to be another like 8 or 9 out of 10 plant for me, something up there with the Gloriosum, and I was really, really excited to have this because this is the closest thing I could get to a pastazanum. But based on my experiences, and it could be the pest, it could be a whole host of different things, absolutely not it for me, basically. So it's an interesting one, and it's not even a plant that it's not even in a good enough condition that I could kind of say, okay, it's the only issue I have with this plant is it's not giving me any joy, so let me give this to anybody else who really, really wants it. I would not wish my specific pastazanum onto anybody at the moment, also barring the fact that it's also just a pest magnet. So I would not wish this on anybody. Again, big caveat, my specific pastazanum. I don't think the pastazanum as a whole is problematic. But yeah, as I said, this was going to be always a bit more of a scathing review that you might be getting on my review series. But yeah, hopefully you've all got better experiences with this plant and you can drop them down below. But yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed. Hopefully I shall see you here soon, and I truly, truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.